Can you hear us, sir?
Loud and clear.
All right. Everybody is here, sir. Or connected.
Okay.
Anthony, this is Sharon. It won't let me start my video.
Yeah, are we skipping the video today? Because I'm having the same problem.
Oh my.
Because the host has stopped it. Which is, you know, not the end of the world, but
You'll just look for our hands to be raised, Tony?
yep, I
Okay.
can put the hands and, you know, we'll give them a second to try and resolve the technical issues before we get started.
Go ahead and start, sir, and we'll work on the video.
Okay. I would like to call to order the regular board meeting of the North County Transit District for March 18, 2020 at 2 p.m. And Anthony Flores, the clerk of the board, please call roll.
Yes, sir. Board Member Sanchez?
Sorry, here.
Board Chair Krantz?
Here.
Board Member Contreras?
Present.
Board Member McNamara? Board Member Desmond?
Here.
Board Member Quirk?
Here.
Board Vice Chair Edson?
Here.
Board Member Jenkins?
Here?
Board Member Bapatal?
Here.
Board Member Von Wilpert? That concludes the roll, sir.
All right. Anthony, well, if everybody would like to join me, please, in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And Anthony will now provide a safety briefing and review the evacuation procedures for those folks who are joining us from NCTD.
Yes, sir. In the event of emergency, I'll dial 911. In the event of an evacuation, please exit using the stairs. Do not use the elevator. Once clear of the building, please do not re-enter unless told to do so by emergency personnel. We have fire extinguishers and fire alarms on each floor of this building. We also have a portable defibrillator located on the first floor and staff on hand trained on CPR procedures. That concludes my safety brief, sir.
Thank you very much. And Anthony, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda itself. However, I do want to note that board agenda item number 14 was revised. The fiscal impact section was updated. The staff recommendation for the board remains unchanged. However, the fiscal impact of the staff report was revised to reflect updates to the applicable funding resources, sir.
Thank you. And do we have any public comments today?
We do, sir. Those were sent to the board and posted to the public. For the public, and the staff will provide a summary when it gets to the specific item on the fair change item, sir.
Okay, very good. Let's see here. So before we get to the specific items on the agenda, we are meeting today under the COVID protocols and via Zoom. So, you know, if there's an item that you'd like to comment on or ask questions about, please raise your hand virtually, which is available generally down in the lower part of the Zoom screen. And we will take board members' comments in order of the hands being raised. And don't hesitate to shout at me if I miss your raised hand. And with that, we will take first items A and B, which are the minutes for the regular board meeting of February 28th February 18th of 2021, and consent items 1 through 10.
Move adoption. Mayor Sanchez moves adoption.
Second by Sharon Jenkins.
Great.
On the motion of Board Member Esther Sanchez, seconded by Board Member Sharon Jenkins to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting held on February 18th, 2021, and consent items 1 through 10. Board Member Bapatel, how do you vote?
Is it possible for me to abstain from the minutes and then do I for the rest? I wasn't there for the meeting, so I usually abstain from meeting minutes if I haven't been present.
Right, we'll do a separate vote.
Okay, perfect. And then also just briefly, my first name is misspelled. So when we do end up actually, having the minutes or whatever else, if we can just make sure that it's spelled appropriately. But yes, I for the consent items.
Okay, I'll need a motion to approve the regular minutes of February 18th.
So moved, Edson.
Seconded.
Was that you, Mayor Sanchez, with the second?
Yes.
Okay, on the motion of Board Vice Chair Joel Edson, seconded by Board Member Esther Sanchez to approve the regular minutes of February 18th, 2021. Board Member Bapatel, how do you vote?
Abstain?
Board Member Quirk,
Yes.
Board Chair Krantz,
Yes.
Board Member McNamara, Board Member Sanchez,
Yes.
Board Member Desmond,
Yes.
Board Member Jenkins,
Yes.
Board Vice Chair Edson,
Yes.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
On the motion of Board Vice Chair Joel Edson, seconded by Board Member Esther Sanchez to approve the regular minutes of February 18th, 2021, motion passes with all board members present voting yes, with the exception of Board Member Bapatel abstain and Board Member McNamara absent.
All right, thank you. So we will need a separate motion for approval of consent items 1 through 10.
So moved, Desmond.
Second. Oh, go ahead.
Dan Quirk, second.
On the motion of Board Member Jim Desmond, seconded by Board Member Dan Quirk to approve consent items 1 through 10. Board Member Bapatel, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Quirk,
Yes.
Board Vice Chair Krantz,
Yes.
Board Member McNamara, Board Member Sanchez,
Yes.
Board Member Desmond,
Aye. Yes.
Board Member Jenkins,
Aye.
Board Vice Chair Edson,
Yes.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
On the motion of Board Member Jim Desmond, seconded by Board Member Dan Quirk to approve consent items 1 through 10, motion passes with all board members present voting yes, with the exception of Board Member McNamara absent.
Okay, great. And then we have an 11th consent item that we needed a separate motion on for approval.
Move approval, Edson.
Second, Jenkins.
On the motion of Vice Chair Joel Edson, seconded by Board Member Sharon Jenkins to approve agenda item number 11. Board Member Bapatel, how do you vote?
Aye. Did it come through? Aye. Okay, there we go. Thanks.
Board Member Quirk,
Yes.
Board Chair Krantz,
Yes.
Board Member McNamara, Board Member Sanchez,
I'm going to abstain since I wasn't able to make that meeting.
Board Member Desmond,
Yes.
Board Member Jenkins,
Aye.
Board Vice Chair Edson,
Aye.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
On the motion of Board Vice Chair Joel Edson, seconded by Board Member Sharon Jenkins to approve agenda item number 11, motion passes with all board members present voting yes, with the exception of Board Member Sanchez abstain and Board Member McNamara absent.
Thank you. Moving on to other business items. Item number 12 is we will be conducting a public hearing and approved continuation of reduced coaster service. Presenting this item is Kimberly Tucker, the Director of Service Planning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon. This is an item to conduct the public hearing and approve the continuation of reduced coaster service. A little bit of background. There we go. Just waiting for the slides to pop up. So on the next slide, please, Anthony. Thank you. Coaster Service has primarily served commuter markets and special events on nights and weekends, such as Padres baseball games, events at the convention center, and the Gaslamp Quarter. Next slide. When the stay-at-home order went into effect last year, passengers who commuted on Coaster started working from home and all special events were canceled, which led to a significant decrease in ridership. And in response, NCTD temporarily reduced weekday service from 22 to 12 trips and suspended weekend service. The impacts of COVID-19 on the transportation industry have been widespread and significant, as you can see from the slide, as most people have stopped traveling and are sheltering at home across the country. NCTD is not alone in experiencing a significant ridership decline. We are actually right on par with our industry in terms of ridership decline nationally. Coaster ridership continues to be down over 90% compared to prior year. NCTD is planning for recovery post-COVID-19 and is exploring initiatives to attract new passengers. We expect non-peak period travel to make up a bigger portion of ridership once the pandemic is over, and as such are proposing to restore 4 midday weekday trips starting April 5th. Full restoration of pre-COVID service levels will occur by October 2021. NCTD Board Policy Number 30 defines the threshold for major service change as a change in more than 25% of daily trips. Under Board Policy Number 30 and FTA Circular 4702.1b, a major service change requires an analysis to evaluate whether the proposed changes would have a disparate impact on minority populations or a disproportionate burden on low-income populations. And even with the addition of 4 midday trips, the current Coaster service levels constitute a 27% decrease from pre-COVID levels, which exceeds the threshold of 25% and qualifies as a major service change. NCTD did not evaluate the service reductions last year because at the time we thought they were temporary. However, we're still in the stay-at-home order a year later. And because the changes that went into effect on March 23rd, 2020 will reach 1 year this month, NCTD is required to evaluate those changes as a major service change under the circular and Board Policy Number 30. The requirements include conducting a service equity analysis and holding a public hearing, which we're doing today. So to summarize, at the February 18th regular board meeting, the board took the following actions: to waive the provisions of board policies that require at least a 30-day notice for a public hearing to consider a major service change, to set the public hearing for the meeting today, and authorize staff to provide detailed information to the public and consider public comment. The clerk of the board published notice of the hearing in both English and Spanish newspapers, and notice was advertised on a flyer placed on Coaster and Sprinter vehicles and on NCTD's website and social media accounts. Staff conducted the service equity analysis and found that continuing to operate reduced Coaster service did not result in a disparate impact on minority populations or a disproportionate burden on low-income populations. NCTD held 2 virtual public meetings, which were advertised via flyers placed on Coaster and Sprinter vehicles and on NCTD's website and social media accounts. We also provided a phone number, an email address, and a mailing address for folks to provide public comments to us. To date, we have received 12 comments, which were in favor of restoring Coaster service and requests for additional night and weekend service. NCTD does plan to fully restore Coaster service to pre-COVID levels no later than October 2021. And further, by the end of 2023, NCTD intends to add more weekday midday trips and additional weekend service. Further, NCTD has received funding to construct a platform at the convention center, which would provide a 1-seat ride to the Gaslamp Quarter, to the convention center and Petco Park. NCTD is also advancing planning for rail improvements and a new platform at the San Diego Fairgrounds. The first phase of that project is funded through construction, and the second phase, which would include construction of the platform, is not yet funded. So staff recommendation is based on the foregoing analysis of findings. Staff recommends that the board review the staff recommendation regarding continued levels of coaster service due to the impacts from COVID-19 and receive and consider public comment. Following receipt and consideration of public comment, staff further recommends that the board close the public hearing on staff's recommendations regarding coaster service, approve the continuation of reduced coaster service beyond 12 months as staff implements phased full restoration of services no later than October 2021, and waive the requirement for a major service change process to fully restore services when feasible. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Anthony. Do we have any telephonic comments for this item?
No, sir.
Okay, board member comments, questions? Board member Bhat Patel.
You. Yeah, I appreciate the presentation, and I'm really appreciative of the outreach that was done. The questions I have are around, of course, we've had service levels interrupted just because of the pandemic. And as folks start to get vaccinated and start to feel a bit more comfortable potentially utilizing public transportation and other avenues, I guess my question is, do we plan to do some more outreach in the summer? Just because as folks start to get vaccinated and there is that comfort level that starts to rise in terms of wanting to start to incorporate more of the public transit option. I'm just trying to understand whether we're thinking about potentially moving up that service level continuation instead of just, kind of aiming for October. So that would be my question. And I'm sure there are folks that are, well, let me stop there. I know I have a few other questions, but I'll stop there first. So.
Sure.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. And staff is, we're having discussions right now about restoring all of coaster service. We know that Padres is going to start with in-person attendance in April. The San Diego Fair is going to be operating a reduced fare this year. And so we are discussing that internally. Ultimately, it's up to the executive director to determine when we will restore service. But at this point, we're sort of looking at early summer.
So, and to piggyback onto that, so we are looking closer to likely June to fully restore the service, commensurate with some of the special events being planned at the fairground. We've gotten a lot of feedback that it's time for us to start bringing the service back so that people can start planning their trips. So the October date was just put out as the worst case scenario in terms of restarting it. It's also the timeline when we typically do service changes for bus and rail. But based upon the information we have today, June is likely the timeline for full restoration back to the base schedule pre-COVID.
Okay, perfect. And then in terms of, I know that one of the things that you mentioned was the community outreach piece. And of course, it was done virtually just due to safety reasons. I guess my other question is, because a lot of the outreach, it seems like in flyers that were posted were actually on the, the vehicles themselves. Is there a way for us to ensure that, especially those that do utilize public transit, that we're actually outreaching to those communities as well? And I think that was one of the things that I just wanted to make sure that we're doing as much as we can to ensure that we've done as much outreach as possible to make sure that it isn't affecting someone's daily, transportation options.
Yeah, so there is going to be a significant amount of outreach that we're going to be engaged in. Direct outreach in terms of welcoming people back, but also a significant outreach in terms of surveys and other tools that we're planning to deploy over the course of the next 12 to 15 months to really make sure we have a good understanding of the market. So the answer is yes. We recognize that's going to be a key piece to us understanding the timing from a business point of view, from an individual point of view, as well as special events that likely will be scheduled. So we will be having a robust amount of outreach for the return of normal operations across all modes.
Okay, great. I think that's it for now, but I'm sure I'll have a few more as my colleagues speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Edson.
Yes, thank you. I'd also like to thank staff for the presentation and their outreach efforts. It's encouraging to me that the district is considering full restoration earlier than the October date mentioned. And especially with the move into the red tier and the number of events that were upcoming. I was in a 22nd DAA community relations meeting earlier this week, and there was a lot of information about the not fair, but Del Mar Fair Presents program that's pretty abbreviated that they're considering. But I think that there's significant opportunity for ridership to begin increasing, as Councilmember Bhat Patel had mentioned. I just encourage us to continue to move forward. I also was in a LoSAN board meeting on Monday, and they've seen an impressive increase in especially weekend ridership over the past 2 weeks. They're up 22%. So I think that that's a good indication of the fact that people are getting vaccinated and are getting back out into the world. And, there is always the need to continue to let people know that it's safe to travel and what steps have been taken to ensure their safety while traveling. So those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other raised hands, so I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing and approve agenda item 12.
So moved. Edson.
Second.
Board Member Bhat Patel, were you the second?
Correct. Yeah, it was me.
Thank you, ma'am. On the motion of Board Vice Chair Joel Edson, seconded by Board Member Bhat Patel, to approve agenda item number 12. Board Member Bhat Patel, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Quirk,
Yes.
Board Chair Krantz,
Yes.
Board Member McNamara, Board Member Sanchez,
Aye.
Board Member Desmond,
Yes.
Board Member Jenkins,
Aye.
Board Vice Chair Edson,
Aye.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
On the motion of Board Vice Chair Joel Edson, seconded by Board Member Bhat Patel, to approve agenda item number 12. Motion passes with all board members present voting yes, with the exception of Board Member McNamara absent.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item 13, and Yun Park Lynch, the CFO, will review the proposed changes to the Sandag Comprehensive Fair Ordinance.
Good afternoon, board members. Before I get started, I would like to provide a quick introduction. Are the slides on, Anthony? Good afternoon. Good afternoon, board members. Before we get started, I will be providing a quick introduction on transit financial and performance management. As a recap, farebox, recovery, ridership, fares, and operating expenses are key factors in assessing financial and performance management. For the most part, operating expenses are largely focused on market conditions based on labor rates or supply and demand on commodities such as materials, fuel, as well as professional services. As far as fares are concerned, regardless of the guidance or requirements established by the Federal Transit Administration, they are for the most part a local policy position. And in a region, the Transportation Committee from SANDAG is for the most part who determines the regional fare ordinance. And the fare box recovery is a factor of both fares and operating expenses, with fare rates and ridership playing a big factor in fare box recovery. The following graphic illustrates the major funding sources and expenses for NCTD. As you can see from the pie chart on your left, NCTD relies significantly on taxpayer subsidies. These are for the most part sales tax revenues derived from TDA and Transnet. However, we cannot set aside that passenger fares still play a significant role in NCT being able to fund its operations and in default its capital program. As far as expenses are concerned, our biggest budgeted expense is purchase transportation costs and professional services. For purchase transportations, NCTD contracts for both bus and rail operations and maintenance to MB and Bombardier Transportation. And for professional services is for the most part related to facilities maintenance and local law enforcement support for NCT security services.
I would like to point out that that particular slide is for me unreadable in each of the categories. I do have the email versions that the clerk had sent out, so I'm able to identify that. But is everybody else, is it readable for everybody else, or is it just my system?
I'm looking at the email as well.
Okay, so anybody that might be viewing this at a later date, yeah, it's not great. Okay, go ahead.
The next slide, you will see three different pie charts. They show both ridership, fares, and operating expenses for fiscal year 2019. What we want to note here is our bus system generates the largest ridership, followed by Sprinter. However, we have to also consider that Coaster, even if it has lower ridership levels than Sprinter brings, does bring a substantial amount of revenue for the district. And in fact, it subsidizes Sprinter and Breeze operations. The following chart illustrates the fare history for NCTD for the last almost 15 years. As you can note that back in 2011, fares were reduced to 2007 levels. And those fares were at that level for almost 12 years, all the way until 2019. One of the feedback that we have received is that fares should be adjusted every year, either based on a CPI or some metric in order to normalize the increases instead of having significant increases from one year to the other one. So what public opinion says is it's probably more acceptable to increase fares gradually over time than have a big jump from one year to the next. The following, and this graphic shows the proposed fiscal impact on the fare changes. As the board recalls, we last discussed scenario C, which is the one that had the most of the support. Under scenario C, there will be no increases in fares, and the fares for the youth one-way will be aligned with SDM. Since that last board meeting, NCTD, MTS, and SANDAG received public comment requesting consideration for the Youth Opportunity Pass that will provide free transit fare for youth 24 and under, and also for free transfers that would allow customers to ride for 2 hours for free, but not including coaster service. One of the things that we want to keep in mind is that the financial strategy that NCTD has pursued in the last few years. From this graphic, you can see that the financial health for NCTD has significantly improved from the Great Recession as of today. We have a very solid liquidity at the district, both from the cash standpoint as well as for the free cash, meaning that we currently have enough funding in our bank accounts to support both our operating and capital expenses. One of the things that we also have to keep in mind is that within having financial health, one of the key policies that the district has adopted is to make sure that one-time revenues are only used for one-time expenses. This graphic, this table shows within our last adopted operating budget for fiscal year 21. It also illustrates our plan for the next 5 years. With this, within this table, we can demonstrate that the district is able to attain a balanced budget within the next 5 years. And even as if we agree to, with scenario C, reducing fares for youth, we'll still be able to have a balanced budget in the next 5 fiscal years.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but these charts are just unreadable at my end as well.
I think it's probably related to the way we are displaying the conference room instead of sharing screen, but we'll have to explore that part of it, I think, for the next meeting.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, just it's hard
I
to.
wonder if we all were to turn off our cameras, I think it might just allow for that one to be a lot bigger, at least for the presentation. So that might be an option.
Let's see what happens. Stop in video. Okay, Yoon, your turn to talk.
Okay, want to make sure that we could proceed. From our staff perspective, NCTD regarding fare rates is that it is important for us to continue growing our ridership and our revenues in the future in order to be able to meet our operating capital needs. We also have to be mindful that any fare-free transit will require new and dedicated sources of funding. And the lack of funding will not only affect our operations, but could also compromise the capital program. And if there was any plan to reduce further fares, we should make sure that we can identify revenue sources that can make up for that loss of revenue. This slide, this is the MTS board recommendation from the last board meeting last week. We, as a staff, believe that we support this position, but as well, we believe that the board should adopt a position that opposes any future fare reductions unless a new dedicated source of funding is made immediately available to offset the loss of revenues. So with that said, we recommend that the board adopt the following position on proposed and requested changes to the comprehensive fare ordinance to support the MTS board recommendation and to oppose any additional fare reductions proposals unless a new dedicated source of funding is made immediately available to offset the loss of revenue from such proposals. And I am available for any questions, and apologize that some of the slides were not clear, but we will share those, I think, after the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any telephonic comments for this item, Anthony?
We do not, sir.
All right, any questions from the board? I see board member Jenkins' hand is up.
Yes, I have a question. Back on pages 3 and 4, you were talking about fiscal year 2019. Why not 2020?
We did not present 2020 because 2020 for the last quarter was an abnormal year. So if you were to look at the proportion of our typical revenue sources, it will not be reflective of what's your typical year. We rely much more on federal funding to supplement the loss of revenues from TDA and Transnet and from passenger fares. So 2020, due to COVID-19, the last quarter was not a typical year.
Okay. And then my other question is, you mentioned about input that it might be better to have periodic fare increases instead of waiting so long. Is that something that's going to be have further discussion? Or I know that wouldn't be something we would discuss now, but is that on our to-do list to have that discussion at some point, or where do we stand on that?
Well, I'll jump in there for you. I think it's something that merits a discussion, particularly at the TC, the Sandak Transportation Committee meeting. If you go back and look at that slide, you can see that for extended period of time, NCTD maintained current fare rates going back to 2007 to 2019, when you take into consideration that we reduced fares in 2011. And that feedback came in is that maybe it would just be better if the region came up with a consumer price index number that we would utilize from year to year to incrementally increase it. I think it's a part of a really good and robust discussion. Along with Board Member Jenkins, the second item that we're asking the board to approve relative to ensuring that future fare reductions have an immediate pay for available, which is probably the most concerning thing to us is having further fare reductions that are not offset by a new revenue source, and what it could mean for the future in terms of requiring either steep fare cuts, service level reductions, or a combination of steep service level reductions and significant fare increases together. So I think those two items merit being raised at the SANDAC Transportation Committee meeting to make sure there's an understanding of those important issues from at least the NCTD board point of view.
So do you need direction from the board today to pursue both of those? Or how do you get that direction?
Well, I think the second item is included in the staff recommendation. The other item, I think if there's a consensus of the board, I'm sure Vice Chair Edson will be able to articulate all three of those positions at the board, but it would not hurt to add that as an additional third recommendation to this agenda item if the board members are supportive.
I think it would be wise to add the third item.
Well, we'll get back to you for a motion. Board Member Contreras.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I do have a question. So when we're looking at not implementing any other fare reductions in the future without a allocated funding source to offset the loss in revenue, the plan that we're looking before us does not include youth opportunity passes. Is that correct?
Correct, it does not.
So if we were to accept this motion, we would be denying the opportunity to implement youth opportunity passes unless we are able to find a source to fund that offset, right?
Correct. And just for clarification, I would say we are looking at a potential pilot program that obviously will require board approval to do potentially targeted fare reductions as it relates to youth populations, as it relates to school transportation. That's something we've discussed, and we may focus our efforts likely on identifying a source of funding to pay for that on a temporary basis. But yes, the motion today essentially says that for future fare reductions, we need to identify a source of funding. And I would say I suspect that Youth Opportunity Pass program, we're talking about a significant amount of money that would take critical money away from the transit agencies operating in capital budgets. It's not fundable without a direct pay for.
But we don't have those, even an estimate of those figures before us, correct? So we would, at this point, be looking at just, that it's a big amount of money, but we don't actually have an estimate in front of us as to what that would be. Is that correct?
Correct. We don't, but I'm not going to try to guess a number now, but this would straddle not only just youth revenue that we receive today, but also a portion of adult fare revenue that we receive today. The Youth Opportunity Program did not make it as part of the MTS board recommendation. Again, that one came in kind of at the tail end of the process. So that number hadn't been modeled because the transit agencies were striving for revenue neutrality at the beginning of this process. And now at the end of this process, we're going to be all acknowledging a revenue loss.
Mm-hmm. Sure. That's the part, just because I know that there's significant support in San Diego County, just as a region for youth opportunity passes. So I understand, you know, the motion, but I feel like it's directly stopping an opportunity to even really look into future plans that the region may have. So I just wanted to ensure that we're clear about the that part of the motion and what it may or may not allow for in the future. Would an increase in fares, would that count as a new funding source for youth opportunity passes? I mean, it may not, you know, be anywhere near the revenue loss, but I'm just curious if that's.
Could you repeat that?
Sure. So if in the future there are fare increases, would that new source of revenue be able to fit within what this motion is saying, that unless we find other revenue in the future, we would not be looking at any decreases in fare revenue, which a youth opportunity pass would essentially be a fare decrease?
Okay, so I think I understand what you're saying is if you were to look at, and I'll just do an example, right, and see if we were to raise the fares on the coaster service to at a rate to fund it, would that in that particular scenario, if you could come up with a number and your fare elasticity model and your ridership could project it and you could generate that revenue, hypothetically, yes, the board could then approve that. But within the specific staff action item, all we're essentially saying is that we're not saying that we're support or opposition to any additional proposals to reduce. We're just saying you have to have a pay for it immediately. That it's a sustainable pay for any new fare reduction. That's all we're trying to accomplish is to make sure that the revenue is not eroded as a result of it.
Sure. And so I just want to clarify for the board and for the public what, you know, different mechanisms we have available to us to be able to pursue any future rate reductions, in which a youth opportunity pass essentially is. So I just want to make sure that we're not tying our hands and being too inflexible to what the changes might be in the future here in our region. So if that's a mechanism, if looking at increased fares in the future is a, you know, mechanism where we can look at different rate decreases, such as a youth opportunity pass, I just want to make sure that that's clear for myself, for the public, and for the rest of the board members. So, but I really appreciate you walking through this scenario. And that's my only comment on this presentation.
Thank you.
Board member, Vice Chair Edson.
Thank you. So I just want to circle back for a moment to Director Jenkins' comment. So with regard to the two items on the staff recommendation on slide 12, at the last TC meeting, I shared NCTD staff's concerns with regard to additional fare reductions unless a new dedicated source of funding is available to offset any loss of revenue from such proposals. So that's something that there is some awareness around already, and I wanted to let Director Jenkins know.
Okay. Thank you. Board Member Desmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. I just wanted to comment on Councilmember Contreras' comments on the youth opportunity passes. As much as I like to have things pay for themselves or have funding, you know, to back up events and things like that, you know, post-COVID here, and I know want to try to increase ridership. I think quite a few people are still going to be scared and not come back to it. But if you want to create a generation of people who start riding transit as opposed to my generation who wants to drive cars, then I think the youth opportunity passes are a good way to get people in a new generation of people to start riding transit as a mode, as opposed to, and make it as easy as possible for them to do that when the time comes. So I just wanted to think, those youth opportunity passes are I think may pay off to help transit in the long run when we can afford those. Thanks.
Okay, yes, and I tend to agree with that, and certainly want to, set up a system that doesn't put up any barriers for ridership of especially young folks. I think that the important signal that we should be sending, however, is one to the legislature, which is that these, these particular issues are not unique to the San Diego region, and that what should be happening, frankly, is a conversation at the state level to provide youth opportunity passes statewide. And so I do think that it's prudent and fiscally responsible to make it clear that we recognize that there's, even though the fare would be free to the youth, it isn't free. And so we should be doing everything that we can to offset that free opportunity pass. So, I think that the other point I would make is that we're certainly not carving this in stone, and we want people to be creative, especially Mr. Tucker and his staff. And if they can come up with something that they think will significantly improve ridership, I'm all ears and interested in hearing that. And to both Board Member Contreras and Board Member Desmond's point, now might be the time to look at some alternatives, given the funding through the emergency, the CARES Act and the ARPA. So anyhow, I see Board Member Quirk's hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to actually echo Karina's comment. Binding us on some non-specific non-action item, like you can't raise something, does seem a little bit odd. And then I'd also point out, Tony, to your comment that you just made, I think the NCTD now has $100 million in cash right now. So I don't know if that's specifically earmarked for capital projects or some other purpose, but I would call that a source of revenue. So, I'm not sure how that's being accounted for.
The position of the board is that we shouldn't be using that money for one-time money for ongoing programs, but that's essentially how we got to where we are. And in the end, I think that this board retains the flexibility to address this down the road when we have an agenda item that lays it all out for us. I think that it might be worth revisiting this particular part of the motion, if that's the way it ends up. So
okay, yeah, just to respond, I'm fine with approving the motion right now, but I know that we always have the authority to make motions if we can get a majority of the board to do something.
Vice Chair Edson.
Yes, I'm absolutely very supportive of encouraging increased ridership wherever we can, and especially among youth, because I agree with some of the comments made that they are the future of public transportation, especially if they start riding now, that they will more than likely continue to do that and have a good experience, that they'll continue to do that through their lifetimes. So my question is actually for staff with regard to what we're doing legislatively, or to approach our legislators to try to secure funding for a program such as the youth ridership.
Well, that's a big question, because that would require a statewide initiative. There are different sources of funding that we could look for a pilot program. let's say we wanted to do a pilot program that was specifically targeted to a segment of our ridership population, we could get some short-term money for that potentially. But the other ones are pretty big initiatives, and traditionally, funding something like the Youth Opportunity Pass would have been funded as a local initiative. So that is part of the discussion, I believe, towards the next sales tax measure. You know, and the comment, I don't want you guys to think that, you know, me or staff that we're opposed. We just know that we're talking about real dollars, particularly as we go down this road, and we need to make sure that we maintain that financial health going in the future. So the best source of money would be we would include this in a sales tax, and that it gets funded that way so that we could implement it from a regional point of view in the way that the region wants it implemented. Of course, we can advocate for additional money, but right now, from a state point of view, there is likely zero chance that we're going to be able to get a directed appropriation to NCTD to do that.
Could we go out, I'm sorry, through the chair, could we pursue grant money specifically for a youth opportunity pass?
Well, so keep in mind, there's a couple of conflicts that we need to make sure we're reconciling. So board policy number 11, which is our budget policy, says that we can't use what that we shouldn't. It says we can't use one-time money for ongoing expenses. Mm-hmm. And so that any fare reduction, particularly of that significance, and I get it, we don't have the numbers in front of us, but I can tell you that's a significant one. Would require a permanent dedicated source of funding that would grow over time. So it's, you know, again, I don't see the capacity of getting a grant where you could implement fully that youth opportunity program up to age 24. I think you could get a grant, a smaller grant that could be very, very targeted. But again, we would be using one-time money for something that would be an ongoing permanent expense.
But I'm sorry, again, through the chair, if it was couched as a pilot program, then it's not.
Okay, that would be a different scenario if you were to put it out as a pilot program. You could potentially, again, I'm not going to speak towards the potential of us getting a grant, because it would only be at the state level that you know, that we could seek. It would be state and local, not federal government. But we certainly can pursue that if the board desires us to pursue that strategy.
I would encourage pursuit of that strategy.
Okay, Board Member Sanchez.
Thank you. And actually, is it Vice Chair Edson? I actually was going to bring that up. Why don't we do this as a pilot project that would be a one-time, and we could use our one-time funding funds that we do have for a pilot project. In the meantime, staff could be working on trying to find a source of funding to make it an ongoing program. I agree that behaviorally, this is an excellent time to be addressing a certain generation that, in my experience, they're not as quick to get a license as I was back in the day. So I think it would be an excellent idea that we do this and do this now, because there are funds. It could be a one-time cost in terms of a pilot project for 1 year or 2 years. You know, I can see that. And hopefully we can make it go on after that. But certainly it would, for 1 or 2 years, it would actually have impact on youth behavior. So I think that it's a wonderful thing to do. I appreciate board members bringing that up. I didn't know, I guess I hadn't understood that we had $100 million as one-time funds in basically being held in trust for the public. But this is an excellent reason for doing this, is to impact the public in increasing use. So I would like to see that added as an amendment to the motion, or I guess there is no motion at this time, but include that as part of the motion. Thank you.
Board Chair Krantz.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I just wanted to, for clarity, we don't have any one-time money that can be used for this purpose. Absent the board wanting to take working cash capital and use it, we don't have any money that could be earmarked for this purpose. I believe, if I understood Board Member Edson, her request was that we seek money, but the clarity is that we don't have that money in hand today to implement a pilot.
Board Member Bhat Patel.
Sure, thank you. First off, thank you to all the board members who have commented on this. I too share the enthusiasm to ensure that our youth can actually utilize public transit and that we're encouraging that. I know that I've talked about ways that we can outreach to folks previously in terms of how do we market to the youth, because marketing to the youth is going to be different than marketing to others as well. So, one of the things I was going to suggest as a potential option for a motion, and I'm just, again, brainstorming out loud, would love to hear others' ideas, but, in terms of how we can potentially bring this back, maybe it could be Mr. Tucker, maybe you can let us know what would be the most appropriate way to bring it back, but incorporating comments from Vice Chair Edson with regards to seeking funding for this particular project, but also thinking about ways that we can actually roll this out while also advocating for this at the state level, as Chair Krantz had mentioned. So is there a way, Mr. Tucker, that we can make that motion, amend the second piece of this, number 2, and add in that we would like to have staff bring back, options for funding that are being sought, and then having a conversation around a youth pilot program that we've been talking about here?
So I think you've just directed, if there's a consensus of the board, we would just bring that item back to the board at a future board meeting, and we would walk through kind of the estimated fiscal impacts and needs, the different funding sources that would be available, and then we would outline our specific strategy for seeking funding to support the implementation of a pilot. So we can do that, and I'm looking over at Yoon. I think we probably can do that probably within by the May board meeting timeline.
Perfect. I was going to ask you for a time certain, so you already answered that. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Board Member Contreras.
I appreciate those comments, Board Member Bhat Patel. I really, the one thing I don't want to do is accept a motion that kind of doesn't provide certain flexibility that we might need in the future. And I think the issue I'm having is that part of the motion that says, no fare decreases unless we have, I understand the financial prudence behind it. I totally get that. But I am having a really hard time accepting that part of the proposed motion. And I don't know if we seem to be talking a lot about youth opportunity passes, and perhaps there are other board members that are having issues with that part of the motion. I'm not sure, but I'm having a little bit of trouble with that part.
Board Member Bhat Patel.
Sure. I just want to respond briefly. Definitely agree with you on that front, that I also am feeling a little, concerned that we don't have the flexibility with regards to that. So I guess I would look to Mr. Tucker here again to see what would be a way if folks aren't comfortable. And I mean, of course, I would be curious to hear from others as well. What would be the best way for us to amend that to have flexibility moving forward for that particular option?
So I'm comfortable with again, this is just me. I'm not speaking for the board. I'm comfortable with striking point 2 of the staff recommendation. which eliminates this issue, and so that we can then have the discussions in May. I think there's too much nuance trying to craft language around that. It's easier just to remove that staff recommendation, number 2, and us come back to you all in May and have those discussions and see where that takes us.
Awesome. That sounds good. Thank you.
All right, board member or Vice Chair Edson.
Thank you. I'm comfortable with going ahead and striking that language, but I had also considered going ahead and moving forward with staff's recommendation plus, and continue to pursue options for grant funding to support a youth opportunity day pass program as a third point. But I'm also equally comfortable waiting till May and having staff come back. So up to the rest of my colleagues here.
Okay, board member Jenkins.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, I'd made comment previously, I'm not sure if it should be incorporated in here or discussed later about the idea of supporting further discussion to consider periodic fare increases. Should that be part of this or should that come at a later time?
So for clarity, this agenda item is providing a recommendation back to the Transportation Committee. So all of the discussions that we're having, the good discussions that we're having relative to the youth program in terms of NCTD exploring it, again, you guys, I'm hearing the consensus of the board say, let's do this. So we're going to prioritize that for May. As it relates to board members Jenkins' comments, that would be a comment that would need to go back to the Transportation Committee to give them as a recommendation for them to consider that as an approach moving forward. And likely they would direct the Sandex staff to work with the transit agencies to study potential ways of being able to look at that.
So I'm hearing you say that it should be incorporated into this today, if everybody agrees.
If desired by the board, yes.
Okay.
Board member Contreras.
Sure, thank you. So at this point, so it doesn't seem like there's a recommended motion, but I don't believe that there is actually a motion. So and if someone wants to amend it, depending on, what the board thinks, but I definitely believe that we should move forward with accepting part 1 of staff's recommendation, with striking out part 2, which is the limiting us to fare reduction. So I offer that as a motion.
And with my hand raised, I would second that motion.
Okay. Anthony, did you get that? The motion and second?
Yes, sir. Got it. Okay. On the motion of board member Contreras, seconded by board vice chair Edson, to approve agenda item 13 as amended, to adopt the following position on proposed and requested changes to the comprehensive fare ordinance. To keep bullet 1, support MTS board recommendation, strike bullet 2, and we'll bring back the youth program discussion to the May meeting. Board member Babatal, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board member Quirk,
Yes.
board chair Krantz,
Yes.
board member McNamara, board member Sanchez,
Aye.
board member Desmond,
Yes.
board member Jenkins,
Aye.
board vice chair Edson,
Yes.
board member Contreras.
Aye.
On the motion of board member Contreras, seconded by Board Vice Chair Edson to approve agenda item 13 as read. Motion passes with all board members present voting yes, with the exception of Board Member McNamara absent.
And I would like to add to, as direction to staff, that Assembly Bills 1350, 2176, and 2012 all had some free or reduced fare language to them. And so if as part of that conversation we have in the future, you could include information related to those bills, I would appreciate it.
Will do, sir.
Okay, thank you. Next up is item 14, which is an update on the NCTD zero emission bus program and a request to authorize the exercise of options for the purchase of a charging system for battery electric transit buses. And presenting this will be Damon Blythe, Chief Operations Officer, bus.
Could I ask a question, point of clarification?
Yep.
Why is it that the screen, we seem to be sharing a screen, or we don't have everybody in the, I can't see everyone. I seem to be just seeing a few people. Is there a sharing of the screen that's happening?
Upper right, you should see something that says view.
Yeah, it's
And what does it say for the view?
I mean, is everybody else seeing the whole, everybody? Is it just me?
I see the speaker primarily and everybody else is small across the top. And then there's another alternative, which is gallery, which would show everybody
Okay,
in a Hollywood Squares fashion.
right. Okay, thank you very much. My apologies.
But I think it's important to note that if you're on gallery, when the speaker shares a slide, that it's too small to read. So I often switch back and forth or toggle back and forth between speaker and gallery, depending on whether we're in board discussion or whether we're looking at a speaker's presentation. If that's helpful.
You'll get a fee for that Zoom tip right there. Yep. Okay, Damon.
Good afternoon. As you indicated, I'm here to give you guys an update on the zero emissions bus program here at NCTD, as well as purchasing chargers for our first set of battery electric buses. So just a little bit of background. In December, the CARB adopted what's called the Innovative Clean Transit Regulation. That regulation mandated that all public transit agencies gradually transition to a 100% zero emission bus fleet with a goal of completely transitioning by 2040. As part of that regulation, transit agencies were required to submit what they called a zero emissions bus rollout plan to CARB no later than the middle of last year, which we did. And in September, CARB approved our plan. And then subsequently at the July meeting, the board also authorized the exercise of options to purchase our first 6 battery electric buses from a California contract with New Flyer. And we expect those buses to start arriving on property in October. So just a little bit of information about our deployment. So the first buses we're getting are battery electric. New Flyer estimates those buses will get a 190-mile maximum operating range. Our CNG buses, just for a point of reference, will do 300 miles on a tank of fuel. The battery life is estimated to be about 6 years, and after 6 years, it usually requires a replacement. That replacement is about $300,000. The current cost per mile for fueling, and I say current, is on par with CNG, and that is expected to rise in later years. And right now, what we're seeing with other agencies is the mean distance between failure on these battery electric buses is about 3,000 to 5,000 miles. Currently, our fleet is 9,700 miles and climbing. The battery electric buses also require a way to charge them. And so we're going to be making some improvements at our Escondido facility. We're installing 6 chargers and 6 dispensers. Those will be located at the CNG lot where we already have bus parking. And SDG&E is funding and completing the underground construction for those improvements. And then we're also going to be deploying hydrogen buses. So a hydrogen bus has a 300-mile range, which is comparable to the CNG buses. The estimated useful life of the fuel cell, which is the device in the back of the bus that converts the hydrogen into electricity, is about 6 years. However, in a striking contrast to the battery electric buses, the fuel cell only costs about $30,000 to replace, which coincidentally is about the same price as an engine and transmission in a CNG bus, which we also do at the 6 to 8 year mark. However, the cost per mile currently for fueling one of these buses is about 200% more expensive than CNG, but that cost is expected to fall in later years. And it's comparable to the battery electric buses, the mean distance between failure on these is still between 3,000 and 5,000 miles. So the hydrogen fueling station we're constructing is going to be built at the Oceanside or the West Division. That station will be sized for up to 50 buses. The reason it's so large is because when you put in a station, if it's 10 buses or 50 buses, it's roughly the same cost. And so to get the most bang for your buck, we're putting in a 50 bus station. So the zero emissions technology funding strategy that we're seeking, we already have money programmed in our budget for CNG bus replacements. We usually try and replace between 10 and 13 buses a year. So right now we're seeking discretionary grants to fund the difference between the zero emissions bus and the CNG bus price. And then we're also seeking grants to provide at least a minimum of 75% of the cost for those facilities improvements. So this is just kind of an outline of where we're at with the projected 5-year cost of our program. So the program as a whole is a hydrogen fueling station, the battery chargers, 6 battery electric buses, and 25 fuel cell buses. And the reason we're seeking 25 fuel cell buses, way more than what we're proposing for the battery, is because the grant that we got for the fueling station requires that we seek that many fuel cell buses. So as you can see, the program cost is expected to be $44.5 million. Right now, we are seeking grants of $29.5 million to sort of fill that, that bottom part of the pie chart there. The strategy that we've outlined right now, the total that we have will cover at least $37.3 million that we're seeking. Obviously, we would love to find more sources, but right now we've outlined sources that would potentially get us at least $37 million, so that more than covers the cost that we were seeking. These are just some pictures of what it looks like when you're fueling one of these buses. So these are both New Flyer buses, very similar to what we're buying. The large gray box there on the side is a charger, not the charger we're looking for, but a charger similar to what we're going to be getting. And as you can see, it's just like charging an electric car. You plug it in and let the charger do its job. So the chargers we're seeking to buy, we're going to be getting those from Sourcewell. This was formerly known as the National Joint Powers Alliance. It's a cooperative created by the Minnesota state government. They seek contracts, competitive contracts that other people can buy off of. So they, in August of 2017, awarded a contract for electric vehicle supply equipment to support the purchase of chargers and related services. And we intend to use that contract to purchase these chargers from ChargePoint. The charging system we've designed with ChargePoint is designed to charge all 6 buses at the same time. It will be capable of fully recharging the 6 buses from almost empty to full within 3 hours. And right now we're anticipating receiving up to a 50% reimbursement for the cost of the chargers from San Diego Gas and Electric, in addition to them helping us with the construction costs. So staff recommends that the Board of Directors receive an update on the NCTD Zero Emissions Bus Program and authorize the exercise of options for the purchase of charging system for the battery electric transit buses pursuant to agreement number 051017 between the state of Minnesota and ChargePoint. That would include training, software, warranty, manuals, delivery, and taxes in an amount not to exceed $780,564. And I'm available for any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I see no raised hands. Are there questions about this particular item? Board Member Jenkins.
I have one question, just curiosity more than anything. It says it's an estimated 190-mile maximum operating range. What do our buses, what's their operating range in a day right now on an average?
So the 190-mile range in the study that we did with STV The operating range is anticipated to cover roughly half of the blocks that we have out there right now. So the work that a bus does in a day is called a block. And so roughly half the blocks that we have out there right now could be accomplished with 190 miles worth of range. The other half requires more than 190 miles worth of range. So we're going to have to assign these buses accordingly.
So does a bus have to go back and recharge itself before it can go out again? Or how does that work?
Yeah, so what we'll end up doing is we'll be putting the bus on a block that's less than 190 miles so that it doesn't have to go out and recharge, or we will recut some of the work so that we can put, the bus on the block, and then it only does 190 miles worth of block, and we will either arrange for another bus to go out and do the rest of the work, or it will be recut so that it's just two pieces of work to begin with.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Quirk.
Thank you. I have concerns that hydrogen isn't actually clean, that the source and the means to get the hydrogen actually involves a lot of, burning of fossil fuels. I know this is all coming from the state and we might not have anything to do about it, but is there a way for us to confirm that the source and the production of the hydrogen is actually clean? And I know people can make the argument that, batteries can be powered by coal if that's what's powering the grid, but theoretically you could power the grid one day by solar. So is there a way for us to try to determine how clean that hydrogen actually is?
There is a way to determine that. The answer is yes. I think the easy answer to say right now is I think the entire hydrogen industry in the state is trying to create scale so that you could then get to a point in time where that the manufacturing of the hydrogen can be done as zero emissions. And so that's probably one of the reasons why you've seen California historically take an aggressive approach to create and fertilize the market. And that's what we anticipate to be the case for hydrogen. I would tell you, Board Member Quirk, that it is most likely that most transit agencies are going to be moving to hydrogen over time, but because of the performance of it and the ability for it to duplicate CNG operations, which will bring forward some of these opportunities for zero emissions. But again, remember, we're kind of at the early stages of this.
Okay, and I'll accept the motion. That's where I'm leaving, or the recommendation here. I just do have concerns. I know battery technology is getting much better as well. So it's something that I think the board and the public should be very aware of. I've read many articles on hydrogen and whether or not it's truly clean. But I appreciate your comments, Matt. Thank you.
And I appreciate those comments. I have some similar concerns when we were soliciting support letters for the grant application. There was feedback from environmental organizations to the effect that you are speaking. And, ultimately, I think it's critical that we continue to advocate for a clean grid and looking for ways to refine to hydrogen in a way that doesn't include fossil fuels. And that's the bottom line, is that the cheapest way to do it right now is through natural gas. And so, we should be pushing hard for a way to do that doesn't include the use of natural gas. So, but when you look at some of the demands of our current route system, I don't think we have a whole lot of choice in terms of which technology we are working with on the bus side. So I see no other raised hands. So I would entertain a motion to approve this agenda item.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
On the motion of Board Member Dan Quirk, seconded by Board Member Priya Babatal to approve agenda item number 14. Board Member Babatal, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Quirk?
Yes.
Board Chair Krantz?
Yes.
Board Member McNamara? Board Member Sanchez,
Aye.
Board Member Desmond,
Aye.
Board Member Jenkins,
Aye.
Board Vice Chair Edson,
Aye.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
On the motion of Board Member Dan Quirk, seconded by Board Member Priya Bapatal to approve agenda item number 14, motion passes with all board members present voting yes, with the exception of Board Member McNamara absent.
Excellent, thank you. We're moving on to informational items 15 and 16, but before we do, Anthony, I would like to request that these slide presentations that you're making be displayed in the same way as you are displaying the voting roll call screen, so that it is not unreadable. So if it's possible to do that, please do. And item number 15 will be presented by Katie Persons, our senior strategic planner, and she's going to update us on the NCTD microtransit service plans and Breeze speed and reliability study.
Good afternoon. Yes, we have a bit of a 2-for-1 presentation for you today. Let me advance the slide. There we go. So to build off a lot of the conversations that we've had over the last several board meetings, we wanted to take some time to provide an update on 2 ongoing procurement efforts. These 2 procurements are separate but complementary and will ultimately come back to the board for approval in the coming months. The first element we'll discuss is NCTD's plans for implementing microtransit service and our procurement for a microtransit software provider. And the second element is NCTD's Breeze speed and reliability study, which will kick off later this summer with a consultant team. So before we get any further, we wanted to take some time to define microtransit, especially as it relates to fixed route bus service. Our Breeze service features a fixed route, schedule, and frequency. The service is typically provided by a 35 to 40-foot bus, and the ideal service conditions for fixed route bus service is concentrated demand along major corridors. In comparison, microtransit features flexible routing and scheduling within a designated zone requested by riders via smartphone or phone call. The service is typically provided by a smaller 12 to 15 passenger vehicle. And with these smaller vehicles, microtransit service can disperse throughout a zone instead of along a concentrated corridor. So it's more appropriately suited for lower density areas. With those service characteristics in mind, we want microtransit to serve a very specific role within the broader NCTD network. We continue to strengthen our network foundations by investing in our top Breeze routes and the Sprinter and Coaster corridors to ensure that their service quality and frequency is meeting customer needs. And to complement those priority corridors, we'll fill in gaps with microtransit in order to extend the reach of our more frequent services, as well as solve that first last mile challenge by providing a high quality connection. The region has recently completed some key microtransit related planning efforts that have given us the hands-on experience we need to pilot more zones within our service area. In 2019, NCTD, together with the City of Carlsbad and Sandag, operated the Carlsbad Connector pilot out of the Poinsettia Coaster Station, which provided coaster commuters with more direct access to major employment centers along Palomar Airport Road. And prior to COVID-19, this service had steadily grown each week, but the pilot was unfortunately disrupted by the pandemic in the last few months of service. Some other key planning efforts that we've conducted over the last few years include NCTD's Strategic Multimodal Transit Implementation Plan, which identifies Breeze routes that would be good candidates for microtransit zones in order to provide a better customer experience. And we're also currently developing a flex operating plan that will dive into microtransit service provision in a bit more detail. And of course, we continue to coordinate our efforts with Sandag and the region in support of the regional plan. So there are 6 key pillars or program elements associated with implementing microtransit service. The core topic of this presentation are those two middle elements, which includes the booking, routing, and dispatching software, and the associated app, website, and call center. The microtransit software itself is core to the program and is what helps set microtransit apart from other transit modes. The software puts a lot of power in the hands of customers by allowing them to request rides on an as-needed basis and tells them exactly when they should expect a vehicle to arrive and when they should expect to arrive at their final destination. The software also provides a lot of valuable data to NCTD by giving us access to detailed service data and key performance indicators that can help us scale the service relatively quickly. We can also work within the software to set minimum service quality parameters, such as average wait time or percentage of shared trips, so that we can respond to distinct needs within different service zones. So to provide a more specific example, I'm going to pick on Route 334 in Vista a little bit. And just to note, this map on the screen does not include all Breeze routes within the zone. It just highlights Route 334 as an example of a route that could be better served by microtransit. So let's say we're on the Sprinter and we want to go to the Vista Library. We make it to Vista Transit Center, get off the Sprinter, and the library is about a mile away. We could take Route 334. It's a little circuitous and takes about 20 minutes. We could walk or bike that mile-long distance, but only if we're able to or have the time or feel comfortable doing so. We could transfer to Breeze routes 306 or 318 and travel a few blocks along Vista Village Drive, but the transfer adds more wait time and you would still need to walk about half a mile to get to the library. So this is a good example of where microtransit could help fill in the gaps for key destinations that are just not well served by traditional fixed route transit. This helps us solve those last mile issues, provides more seamless connections, and it also helps us to right size the vehicles that we have out on the street so that they fit within the context of the community that they travel in. NCTD is currently in the process of procuring the microtransit software provider. We have received a lot of good feedback from potential providers, so we're pulling back the scope a bit to refine it and add some more information and really define our overall vision for the service. We've also identified the need for very few specific solutions, and that includes customized seat requests, solutions for customers who are unbanked or prefer cash payment, and solutions for customers who do not have access to a smartphone or who have limited access to internet. A few key upcoming milestones for our microtransit service will occur later this year, and that includes the procurement of the software provider itself, as well as the vehicle delivery, which we expect to occur later this summer and includes 12 passenger vans and 3 wheelchair-equipped vans. We expect to award a contract for the software provider in late summer or early fall after we refine that scope a bit more. And that brings us to the second component of this presentation, the Breeze Speed and Reliability Study. Late last year, SANDAG and NCTD were awarded funding through the Caltrans Transportation Planning Grant Program to conduct the Breeze Speed and Reliability Study. NCTD's planning efforts over the last several years have examined existing connections and disconnections between land use patterns, socioeconomic characteristics, and local and regional travel patterns. We've zeroed in on a toolbox of 6 key strategies to help improve access and mobility across the NCTD network. The Breeze Speed and Reliability Study will build upon these more recent studies by identifying bus supportive investments on 10 key corridors throughout the system. The study will produce a phased infrastructure, technology, and service plan that's aimed at improving the speed and reliability of our Breeze network. The study will require a significant amount of communication with Caltrans and city partners in order to identify mutually beneficial solutions. So within this study, we're looking at 3 key tiers of transit supportive improvements. The first tier is bus rapid transit, or BRT, which has distinct characteristics separate from general transit priority measures. So BRT typically includes a dedicated right-of-way, specialized vehicles, and enhanced stations and fare collection systems that streamline the boarding process for our customers. This study will identify candidate corridors that could warrant BRT service throughout the network. The other two tiers of transit supportive improvements we'll be exploring are enhanced bus and express or limited stop service. Enhanced bus includes some of those same transit priority measures that we might see in a BRT environment, such as transit signal priority, queue jumps, and bus only lanes, but they generally occur at specific locations instead of corridor wide. The express tier will examine new service patterns that are tailored to specific market needs. And on this slide, you'll see a few examples of the enhanced bus features that we'll be examining as part of the study. We've highlighted here some of the key steps within the study. So we'll work closely with our consultant team to evaluate industry best practices and assemble a comprehensive assessment of the existing mobility conditions in our communities today. We'll then work with our local partners to identify opportunities and potential strategies to mitigate our problem areas. And in an iterative process with our partners, we'll identify specific solutions and recommendations that will ultimately guide our implementation and financial plans. The final plan will provide a programmatic approach to BRIES priority measures, while also including the specific needs of each jurisdiction. The final plan will give us an understanding of the impacts and benefits of the recommended priority measures and include a phased implementation and financial plan. And this plan will be an important tool for the region to apply for discretionary grant funding in order to implement the projects that are identified in the final plan. So this slide shows our initial list of corridors to include in the study, and it's a draft list now. A few things to note: this study will not look at all BRIES routes in the system, but instead a focused set of no more than 10 corridors. And in some of the first phases of the study, we will work with our local partners to identify the final list of study corridors to be included. We anticipate coming back to the board at the July meeting to award a contract for the study, which will then kick off shortly after. And we expect the study to take approximately 18 months to complete. And with that, it's time for questions.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Board Member Contreras.
Thank you to staff for that presentation, and definitely using Vista as an example. I mean, this is something that I hear all the time from Vistans, that it just, to get from one point of the city to a destination like the library, or to even go to the bank, it ends up taking a significant amount of time. And that's if the bus, arrives with zero delay and there's no mechanical issue or anything like that, which could then add another, like an hour to the ride that person was looking for. But this is a fantastic idea. I'm really glad that we're moving in this direction. And I saw on that list there, some Vista corridors were really prominent on that list. So my question is, for needing a bus only lane, is the reason, I'm looking at some of these corridors in Vista, and I know that we were able as a city, which to the detriment of some of the residents there, were able to restripe existing corridors from 2 lanes to 3 lanes. What makes it more feasible for us to look at some of these corridors? Are there what are kind of like the standards that we're using to identify prominent corridors that could be part of this program?
So the base standard was looking at, I think, our 10 most productive bus routes. So that kind of creates the overall mapping. But then applying some of the standards that define bus rapid transit versus enhanced bus service. And those types of characteristics. Obviously, at the end of the day, we're going to try to take the good, better, best approach. There may be in some instances that hopefully cities would partner with us to have bus-only lanes during specific periods of time where cars could come into those lanes and make right turns, as an example. So this is really just going to be an exercise about what can we do, what are the easy, low-hanging fruit things that we can do, moving it on up towards things that we could do towards future improvements that really achieve the goals that are desired. So everything is really, really scalable. The initial focus for us was looking at those primary bus lines and looking at leveraging the primary bus lines with our rail lines, and then providing super duper quick and efficient first and last mile connections and travel in between.
Well, it's just fantastic. And I'm really supportive of, what we're trying to do here. And, at the same time, these transit oriented corridors where we're getting a lot of higher density, it's a perfect opportunity to go to these new developments and say, hey, you know what? There is a rapid transit system that can connect you from point A to point B to point C to, extracurricular activities downtown, like who knows? But I really, really appreciate this approach and the efforts that went into putting this report in front of us. So thank you so much for that.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Edson.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie, for the presentation. And using microtransit as a last mile solution really does help solve one of the 4 key criteria I think are necessary to encourage increased ridership. The others, of course, being frequency, reliability, and competitive cost. So it's that last one, competitive cost, that has me curious. Is there any idea of what the cost will be for the microtransit?
So it's going to vary, I suspect. And ultimately, policymakers approve fare rates, not executive directors. But we have lots of different dimensions to microtransit. So microtransit in some instances is just going to be replacement of a local fixed route bus and providing those connections. But I can see additional evolutions of it where we're targeting specific needs. Let's say connections to middle school and high schools where you may have a different pricing structure, or if it's a destination-based service, let's say, Joel, we're talking about one Paseo to Solana Beach. I think as we go out to procure the app, and as Katie astutely said, we pulled it back because we got good questions and we thought a whole heck of a lot more about what we should be considering towards the future. That once we get into the specific service design concepts, we're going to bring forth recommendations for pricing, and it's going to be really a policymaker decision relative to how the fares are ultimately set.
So through the chair, what type of fare? Oh, the Carlsbad pilot program, wasn't that free transfer with coaster ridership?
It was free for coaster ridership, and remember, and that's kind of the example. That's one example of that. And then there's likely the secondary example of when we're looking at Carlsbad and San Marcos as 2 big flex zones as a potential, that we're going to have to understand within those markets what should be priced as consistent with a bus, or what should be priced consistent with the flex program, which would have a higher fare rate. Lots of this is going to go back to, again, if there's specific fare box recovery targets that we're trying to achieve. Think about it this way, Uber operates at a discount from taxi cabs, and that subsidy, and those costs are made up and distributed in a couple of different ways. we're not going to be in a position to have a program that gives everybody a Uber trip from this destination, 12, 16 miles for $2. We're going to go bankrupt. And so as we lay this out, as we complete the pilot programs, that's where we're going to start trying to figure out the appropriate pricing that we will bring forward as recommendations to the board. So not trying to be evasive, but until we actually get closer to that timeline that we ferreted out all of the market pieces and understanding the specific services, we're not at a point today to say that we know what the fare is going to be, but I just suspect that it's likely to be different targeting points based upon the different types of services we're planning to offer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Jenkins.
Yes, we talked early on about the Carlsbad connector. Do we plan on bringing that back? And if so, when?
So this will be essentially the permanent replacement of the Carlsbad connector. Unfortunately, that program got cut short because of the COVID-19, but we're ready to go to the next step in terms of implementing microtransit on a much more permanent basis going forward in the future. So this will replace that program with a new specifically branded program from NCTD.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
I know we looked at the issue of transporting students to school, I believe it was 2 years ago, because of the cutting of services by school district in Oceanside. There was a particular school that the kids were walking a long ways. And I know that Assemblywoman Berner Horvath was trying to find the funding to implement a pilot program. Is that the sort of thing that we're going to be looking at in terms of the limited stop with service patterns tailored to market specific needs, i.e. commuters? And the main issue now in this is the schools. Is that something that we're working with school districts to try and identify opportunities with some of this service?
So the answer is yes. And so we just had a meeting with the Oceanside Unified School District superintendent. And that's one of the topics we're trying to partner with school districts. And I think, when we come back in May and talk about the FAIR programs, we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about, the vision and the things that we believe really, really make sense from a equity and financial stability point of view. But that is certainly part of the whole discussion. And even when you look at it, pre-COVID in terms of what was creating congestion, one of the things that identified was creating congestion was people doing those trips to go drop their kids off to school and then come back onto the freeway. And one of the direct market, needs that we've heard feedback on is for assistance with getting kids to school with the expectation that people felt a lot more comfortable with public transportation rather than Uber or Lyft being the primary trip provider for that type of service. So yes, Board Chair.
Great. Encinitas school districts eliminated busing probably 20 years ago, and it is responsible for some of the most congested areas every day, both morning and night around schools. So if there were a way to be able to provide that service, I think it would benefit both the district as well as each city. The other question that I had is, what sort of engagement are you soliciting from each city when you are exploring these things? Are NCTD staff contacting their primary staff member in each jurisdiction, or is it based upon which jurisdictions you're studying at the time? How is that happening?
A combination of all of the above, of us working directly with the kind of the key transportation folks within the city, some discussions with city managers, some discussions with school districts. We're doing it all. And as we move this ball forward, we're going to be broadening that discussion with people looking for partnerships, because it's more than just a microtransit program. So one of the things that we raised with Oceanside was we wanted to make sure that kids had a pronto pass in their hands, and seeing if we could explore the possibility of having the student pass also have a chip or become the Pronto-based pass so that kids right away would have a vehicle to be able to take public transit. So we're reaching out to all of the different stakeholders. One of our key focuses and the thing that Katie manages me most on is we need to start and we need to focus and work through some of the growing pains before we try to do this on a broader scale, because there are going to be lessons learned as we roll this thing out.
Yeah, and I think that for me, it would be great. I would like to make sure that I'm aware of the conversation if one is taking place with staff members in the city of Encinitas. I don't know if you start that with a letter or email to the city manager, or whether you work with directors, or what level of engagement that you have. But knowing that those conversations are ongoing is important. And, you know, the reality is that some of the changes in terms of creating express services by bus, as you point out in these slides as part of the presentation, it involves paint on our streets, which is one of the most cost-effective ways of affecting change. And so, if we need to accelerate conversations about the ways we can move buses more quickly, I would love to be able to do that in our city. I do know several people who used to take bus 101 to UCSD and had to give up. They just couldn't, the efforts on public transit on Route 101 because of the impacts of traffic congestion were impossible to deal with. It was doubling the length of their commute. And so, you know, if there were ways to paint and restrict lanes during commute hours, I think that that's a conversation that we should be having at each jurisdiction to see how we can improve things. So
Board Member Krantz, I was answering towards microtransit, but for clarification on the breeze speed, once that contract is awarded, we plan to send a directed letter to each board member along with their city manager and their public works director. We really want to get everybody engaged and working closely with us on that effort to participate in the meetings, because this is going to become, I think, as you know, as a network discussion, you know, not just one city, but the entire transportation network that we're going to try to focus in on. But we're going to be counting on you all as board members to ensure that your city is actively engaged in this discussion. That's one of the reasons we wanted to do this presentation. And now that you've highlighted it, you've reminded me to say, this is something that we really want each board member representing each jurisdiction to kind of be our ambassador, leading that discussion and making sure that there's a meaningful discussion and participation and efforts made to achieve the goal.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that, you know, it's important that board members Bhat Patel and Sanchez and I are engaged to make improvements to routes 309 and 101. And I work with board member Jenkins on 304. These are all, you know, you can't have express lanes painted and stop at Leucadia Boulevard if you're going to make it work. So we have to coordinate interjurisdictionally. And so I would like to encourage engaging the elected officials in that as soon as possible, because I think the changes are very important. So thank you for the presentation. I see no other raised hands. This was an informational item, so we appreciate the information. And moving on to the next item, Tracy Foster, the Chief Development Officer, and staff from Sandag will present us with an update on the recent Delmar Bluffs failure.
All right, thank you, Chairman Krantz, and good afternoon, board members. I'm joined today for this presentation by Mr. John Haggerty. He's the Director of Engineering and Construction at Sandag, and we'll be talking you through some of the later slides. But first, to start off, if I can get this to
Yeah, how sharp that is. That's very nice.
You got it? Okay. Just as a refresher to the March 4th update that I provided to the board, At the end of February, we did have a collapse of the bluffs just south of 4th Street. The picture to your left shows the seawall at the bottom of the bluffs right along the beach. And as a result of the slide, the seawall also collapsed. Sorry, okay, there we go. So we had an immediate response to the collapse of the bluffs. NCTD's maintenance of way contractor went out right away, inspected the tracks and fenced off the area. We also had our on-call geotech firm do an inspection of the area. And as a result, it was recommended speed restriction for the trains, which are currently in effect today. Also, with the emergency response and in accordance with board policy number 19, our executive director declared an emergency exigent circumstance, which allowed for NCTD to transfer $500,000 to Sandag for immediate repairs, actually preparation for repairs and cleanup. And this will be coming back to the board as ratification. We're working on the Exhibit A right now, and we'll come back to the board for ratification at our April 22nd board meeting. Also with some of the emergency response, and while it's not on the slide, I just wanted to call out that we've been having regular meetings with Sandag and Sandag's consultants on a daily basis. We've also been having regular security meetings, and that is also with Sandag, the City of Del Mar, the state parks. I'm probably missing somebody else, but it's been a great collaborative effort to make sure that all parties are involved in working together on this emergency. So a little bit about the funding. Sorry, I'm going to go back one slide. Oop. A little bit about the funding. So as I mentioned, there's some cleanup that's first needed, and that was performed last weekend. And John will talk a little bit more about what was done, but that cleanup required some funding. Sandag identified $370,000 from the Bluffs 4 project. And the estimate for total repairs of this collapse is estimated at $10.5 million, to which Sandag was successful in pursuing state funding, and will be going next week, March 24th, to California Transportation Commission for them to allocate state funds for the repair. And now over to John, who joins us via Zoom, and he was going to go through all of the repairs.
All right, so good afternoon. I'm sorry to have to be here under these kind of circumstances. But what happened in the emergency repair over the weekend? We basically came back in and you can see the grading equipment here. There were cracks and fissures at the top of the bluff at track level where this piece of equipment is. And so we had to loosen that up. And then we regraded the slope and stabilized it. And we're doing, basically created a temporary buttress at the slope to stabilize that and move all the loose material. So next slide. So this is a picture of that in progress. So there's a grading operation at the top and the base of the slope. And then in the lower right hand, you're seeing the actual grading. You can also see the concrete retaining wall that failed. Is actually the back of it you're looking at the very bottom of the picture, where some of those guys in the orange vests and yellow vests are standing. So that's actually the retaining wall that collapsed. Right now, that will provide some additional protection from the toe of the slope and keep it from eroding with the wave actions. Because right now, the waves and high tide come right up to the face of the bluff. Okay, next picture. And this is just shows at track level, the loose soil has been graded off. The picture at the right shows the stabilized slope with construction, fencing, signs in place to discourage people from getting into that slide area. This is the condition it will remain in for for a little bit while now. Next slide. Okay, so the immediate work that really needs to be done to stabilize the slope, and what we'll do is stabilize it the way we had planned to stabilize it under our Del Mar 5 and 6 projects, which will be for 30 to 50 years. And once we finish this immediate stabilization, we would be able to return the track back to full speed service. But this work has 3 components. At track level, the plan is to place approximately 80 vertical piles. They'll be parallel to the tracks, and they'll have tiebacks which go in behind and underneath the tracks to help stabilize those piles as well. And then at the top of the piles, and you won't see this, but there'll be what we call a grade beam or a concrete beam that connects the top of the piles just under the surface to also provide additional stability. The bluffs that failed is in a very poorly compacted soil. That fill dates back to around 1912, about the same time the wall was constructed. This area really needs to be dug out to a certain extent and then recompacted so that it can be stable, and not only be stable from a safety standpoint, but it also will help support the piles. And then at the base of the bluff, the 1912 era retaining wall will be removed, and we'll construct a new seawall. So right now, the team is analyzing geotechnical data. We're working to complete the design as rapidly as possible. As Tracy indicated, there's daily meetings on the design. That's for the immediate repair. We've also authorized the contractor with some money that we had available in the Del Mar 4 contract that was just finishing up, and the $500,000 that NCTD provided. We are ordering I-beams, and we've done the cleanup over this past weekend. Now, in the coming weekend, during that AWW, the contractor is going to work at the track level, basically to prepare pads to get their drilling equipment later in for the drilling when we get to that point. As we've said, Sandag expects to be successful on the March 24th, 25th California Transportation Commission with approval of the $10.5 million. After that approval, then Sandag would actually be able to complete contracting for the bulk of the emergency repairs. And we'd be doing that through a change order to our Del Mar 4 contractor, Blue Pacific. The schedule really is through April and May to build the ties, the tieback, and the tiebacks at track level, and also recompact that bluff face. We'll be working nights and on weekends, and we'll have to determine, we haven't yet determined how many all work windows we may ask for in addition to those that have been already scheduled. That's part of the work we're doing now. And then into June and potentially July, we would build the seawall and vegetate that slope that we saw in the picture against future erosion. Next slide. Okay. So we're just looking into the future. We are continuing to work on the Del Mar 5 and 6 projects. So Del Mar 5 was going to be a separate project with piles, tiebacks, and lagging that would be needed to create a retaining wall at the top of the bluffs at track level, and would also include some important drainage features that need to be reconstructed or repaired on the bluff. And then Del Mar 6 was going to follow with seawalls and doing some slope grading and revegetation. So in consultation with North County Transit District, our design team, and coordinating with the California Coastal Commission, we are now really designing projects 5 and 6 concurrently. We're considering having one construction contractor to do all of this work, with the option of having that in phased implementations. So actually, we benefited by combining these projects. We're looking at savings in construction cost and potentially time. Construction is expected to start in mid-2022. That's just the time it's going to take to complete the design process, get the permits in hand, and advertise and award a contract. Construction is probably going to take up to 3 years. We don't have an exact time right now, but construction duration right now is really being driven by the limited access and working windows we're going to have. At the track level, of course, we've got trains running most day or all days and most nights. And at the beach level, we have the tide coming up to the face of the bluff. So it really restricts when a contractor can get in there and complete the work. Next slide. And so this just is an overview of where the work is going on. Just as a matter of orientation, to the left where it says MP or milepost 244.1, that's essentially where the coaster tracks cross the, there's a grade crossing. And then heading south all the way to Torrey Pines State Park parking lot. So the yellow area on the slide is where we've actually done the bluff reinforcement in the past, but there's needs of additional retrofit. Those reinforcements were done with a limited life of about 20 years. And so in order to get 30 to 50 years in the time, we want to at least be able to stabilize the bluffs for the eventual relocation of the line off the bluffs. We're going to have to do some additional work in those areas. And then the blue indicates where the new work will be done to stabilize the bluffs. And then next slide. And then funding for the projects. Project 5, currently the budget is $65.3 million. That project is fully funded through several different funding sources. And then Project 6 has a $33.5 million budget. And at this point, Sandag and NCTD, in a working group with the state, had pledged about $10 million each. And so that leaves us about $13.5 million that's currently unidentified. We're looking for alternatives to fill this gap. Potentially stimulus or other infrastructure funds might be where we'd start to look. But I don't think that $13.5 million in the time frame we're talking about within a couple of years would be something we wouldn't be able to identify and move forward with the project on. That concludes what I wanted to explain to you, and I'll turn over to Tracy.
Thank you, John. So that concludes actually the entire presentation. If there's any questions, we can help with that.
Board Member Quirk.
Thank you for the presentation. Regarding the seawall at the bottom that's to be constructed, would it be in the same location? Would it be further west? Would it be further east? And would it be within the current zone, or would it be extended north and south to provide additional protection or security for the bluffs?
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. We're looking at one little slice here of all the work we're doing, but the seawall would be more or less from a horizontal standpoint in the same location as the wall that collapsed, plus or minus a couple feet east or west. And it would be quite a bit longer. The would go about 200. Hang on, I got a picture I'm looking at. So yeah, it would go to the north and to the south quite a bit. In fact, there's about 288 feet long seawall when we complete it. The bluff to the south of where this collapsed is, I think, what I would consider a fairly fragile condition as well. So we want to get that seawall in there just to keep the wave action from eroding the bluff in that location. And in Delmar 5 and 6, there are other seawalls proposed. The seawalls are really necessary to keep the rate of bluff retreat reduced so that those piles can do their job.
Okay. And would the seawall be consistent with what was recently constructed a little bit further north?
Yeah, it would definitely be consistent with that. In some of these areas, I think we're proposing, we may need to put in this particular fail area more than just the timber lagging that we put in. We put piles in, steel piles that stick up with timber lagging behind them. We may need some concrete lagging in some of these areas. But I think that's a compromise that we've worked out with the Coastal Commission, because at some point they would like to see the seawall disappear when the railroad's no longer there. And so the type of wall we're building could be, the lagging could be removed, and the piles and the top of the steel top of the piles is sticking up be cut off fairly easily. So it would be something that can be removed.
Great, thank you.
Board Member Contreras.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. I just have a question regarding vegetation. the vegetation that's going to go in there, I mean, is it going to be consistent with California native plants that would be site suitable? Because this is an opportunity to ensure biodiversity and habitat reconstruction to a certain extent for our native pollinators, which really just don't have too much intact habitat and ecosystem. So I'm curious on the revegetation, because we approved a consent item earlier for palm trees that are quite expensive, and the amount of biodiversity that they provide is pretty minimal. So I'm just curious about the vegetation.
Yeah, no, certainly. In this area, and we'll do it at this area where the slope failed, but also in 6 when we actually go in and do some more retaining walls and slope grading, we will replant with native vegetation. And part of that will be to make sure, we'll have an obligation to make sure that plant material actually grows and is able to do what it really needs to do, which is, I think, the environmental things you discussed, but it is more importantly, hold the slope together and create that kind of web of plant material and roots so that we don't lose so much of the bluff.
Awesome. Perfect. Exactly what I want to hear. Thank you.
Vice Chair Edson.
Thank you. My first 2 questions were asked by my colleagues, but my third question is the makeup of material that ended up on the beach. I know there was concrete from the very old seawall, and I understand that area had been filled at some point, and it may not have been filled with what we would like to see on the beach. But kind of to cut to the chase, is it clean enough or quality enough material that it can be used for beach renourishment, any of it, or is it all being hauled off?
Well, I think there's a combination of answers here. And that one, no, first, you're absolutely correct. And I didn't go into great detail on that, but that apparently there was a side canyon in there that was filled when the railroad was originally built. And that fill goes back to, again, like the 1912 era. And so it's poorly compacted. It's one of the reasons that retaining wall was there to start with, and the reason it fell. So the plan right now is to really go back in there, put the piles in, make sure it's really stable, and then take out some of that material to a certain depth and then recompact it in and put the same material back in there. There's really not going to be a lot of excess, and it would definitely not be beach sand, at the type of material you'd put on the beach as sand. So if there's any excess, it'll be hauled off.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. The photographs seem to show that the 1912 seawall, it looked like the sand at the toe of the wall had been eroded quite a bit, and maybe, in fact, the ocean had undermined the footing of that seawall. Did that play a factor? Was that a factor in the collapse of the wall?
Yeah, I honestly don't know exactly, but that's what everybody and all the engineering and geologists surmised, is that, this winter we had some particularly high tides with some decent sized surf, and that came right up to the bluffs. And that wall has virtually no steel in it. It's just a big lump of concrete with, again, virtually no footing. I mean, we would never engineer something like that in today. And so once enough of it got eroded underneath by the wave action, yeah, that's the primary reason it came down. Yeah, even the fill behind it isn't like saturated or wet. It basically came down because of wave action, is our best estimate.
In Encinitas, there is a beach called Beacons, and we have been dealing with bluff collapse there over the history of the city and even before then. And there was at one time a proposal to build I think it's called a stem wall that would support the base of the bluff from sloughing, because it collapses kind of in a way from the bottom, not always from the top. Is it the same? You're not a geologist, but do you know if it's the same geological condition there that might benefit having that stem wall type approach?
Oh, I'm really not sure I can answer that question because I'm not that familiar with the area up there, and the geology does change along here. We've got two formations along the Del Mar Bluffs. There's a sandstone and a mudstone that are in different layers, and so I'm not sure what happens up there. Yeah, and it's really difficult. We have, I think, established an amazing working relationship with North County Transit District and the Coastal Commission. And I think we're going to be able to move ahead with all of the things we're talking about. But the seawalls were a particularly difficult thing for the Coastal Commission, I think, to come to grips with. But I think they understand the importance. They will really allow us to protect the track and limit the erosion of the bluffs until eventually the track is relocated. So I can't really speak to the farther out north in Encinitas, but that was a very, I think, interesting conversation, and I think it came out on the best side for everybody.
And at one point, there was some consideration being given to create some safe and legal access to the beach in this stretch between Torrey Pines State Park and Coast Boulevard area at the power plant there. Is that a part of the conversation with the city of Del Mar? Is Sandag and or NCTD engaged in conversations to include that sort of feature in this project?
Sandag has just started a study to look at coastal access through there. That was, I believe that was part of a settlement that came out of the North Coast Corridor. And so we have a grant to study coastal access through that area. North County is involved in that. I know Matt's aware that we're working with his staff on that and the city of Del Mar. It's really just begun. And I wouldn't venture to say what would likely to come out of that as far as recommendations.
Okay, very good. No other raised hands. Thank you for the information. And let's hope that everything comes together in a way that keeps any more catastrophic bluff collapses from happening.
Thank you. Appreciate your support.
Okay, with that, we're on to the closed session item number 17. And as a reminder to those participating remotely, you have to disconnect from this Zoom session and click on the link that was part of the information that you were given to sign into the closed session. And with that, Lori Winfrey, our general counsel, will take us into closed session.
Thank you, Chair Kranz.
Don't want it to.
I just want to clarify, am I not joining this closed session meeting?
Board Member Quirk, this is Lori Winfrey, General Counsel. Yes, that was the recommendation of staff because we have an adverse interest with the city of Del Mar on this action.
Okay, thank you.
So with that, thank you, Chair Kranz. We will be going into closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9, subsection D1, conference with legal counsel regarding existing litigation related to the Surface Transportation Board docket number FD 36433.
And Dan, I think you can stay on the Zoom and would somebody contact him when, or, and we'll be coming back out to this Zoom. So.
Yes, sir.
All right, very good. Thank you.
No, we're in closed session.
It was a nice, quick closed session.
Yeah, we're on pace to be done with this meeting before 5 o'clock or 6. That's good, yes.
Present with the exception of board members McNamara, board member Quirk, and board member Desmond. The board authorized staff to request a further extension to the stay of the proceedings at the Surface Transportation Board through December 31st of 2021 to allow the parties to continue efforts toward a mutually acceptable resolution. That concludes my closed session report.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Tucker, do you have anything to report?
No, sir.
Oh, that's a first.
Yay. Oh, I'm sorry.
And I would like to open board member reports, comments, and correspondence by congratulating board member Priya Bhatt Patel on the birth of her daughter. Congratulations.
It was a son, but thank you. I appreciate the
I'm glad that
best
you're
wishes.
neutral and been safe. Holy cow. Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. Yeah, no, he's sleeping. He just turned a month old yesterday. So he's been sleeping through the meeting, which was helpful. So,
Yes,
but
indeed.
thank you for the best wishes. I appreciate that.
Yep. Any other board member reports, comments, or correspondence? All right, hearing none. Anthony, do we have any remaining public comments?
We do not, sir, but Board Vice Chair Edson, do you have any comments?
Yes, I'm sorry, my hand gets lost up there. I
Oh,
think.
yeah, I see it up there. Uh-huh.
It wasn't that big a deal, but I just wanted to report that on Monday, the LoSAN board approved their 2021, 22, and 2022, 23 business plan submittal. And it provides for their annual budget. And what that means to NCTD is that Pacific Surfliners planned service restoration is 80% of FY 2019-20 train miles. And in FY 21-22, that means 10 daily round trips and 100% in FY 22-23, which would be back to the 13 daily round trips. Also, the LoSAN optimization study next steps, which are important to us because NCTD is currently working to develop operating plans for coaster service expansion and is coordinating closely with regional stakeholders, including LoSAN, to make all this happen. What the integrated vision in the LoSAN optimization study and the rail-to-rail program, which is always really important to us because our coaster riders then can hop on an Amtrak. Whatever train comes first, jump on. And so anyway, that and LoSAN, as I mentioned earlier, has seen an impressive increase in especially weekend ridership over the past 2 weeks. It has increased 22%, and that's pretty significant because they were getting little dribs and drabs. And lastly, I was appointed to serve as the 4th executive committee member on the LoSAN board.
Awesome.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay. So the next scheduled meetings are the PAF meeting on March 30th at 1 p.m., the MISPEDA committee on April 5th at 2 p.m., the executive committee meeting on April 12th at 11 in the morning, and the regular board meeting on April 22nd at 2 p.m. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Tony.